The Aurelian Club wasn't built of brick and mortar. It was constructed from lineage and whispers. Its walls breathed the rarefied air of fortunes made before the First World War, and its floors were polished by the footsteps of men who moved markets with a single phone call. In this world, you were either a portrait on the wall or a ghost polishing the frame. Elara Reed was a ghost. At 22, her existence was a masterclass in self-effacement. She was the silent refill of a baccarat glass, the swift removal of a finished plate, the murmured, "My apologies," when a titan of industry, laughing too loudly, stumbled into her path. Her life was a muted watercolor of a fifth-floor walk-up in a less fashionable part of the city, a staggering debt that wasn't hers, and this job, serving gods from their perch on Olympus. She was exceptionally good at it, because she understood the geometry of the room. She saw the patterns, the invisible lines of power and desire that crisscrossed the dining floor. She could anticipate a CEO's need for his coat check ticket before he even reached for his wallet, a skill she attributed to being a good observer. It was more than that. It was an instinct, a way of seeing the world as a grid of influence and potential, of strong positions and weak ones, a skill honed not in a restaurant, but in a quiet room, long ago, with her grandfather. Tonight was the Van Doren Foundation's annual gala, the crown jewel of the city's philanthropic season, held within the Aurelian's grand ballroom. The air was a potent cocktail of Dior J'adore, vintage Cuban cigar smoke, and the metallic tang of ambition. Elara was assigned to Table 1, the celestial center of this universe, and at its heart sat Cassandra Van Doren. Cassandra was not merely rich, she was an institution. The Van Doren name was carved into the cornerstones of museums and libraries. She was achingly beautiful, with the sharp, predatory grace of a snow leopard, and she wore the legendary Van Doren emeralds, a cascade of green fire at her throat, with the casualness Elara wore her server's apron. Beside her sat Marcus Thorne, the reason for the extra wattage in Cassandra's smile and the extra chill in her gaze. Her fiancé. Heir to the Thorne media conglomerate, Marcus was a study in contrasts to his intended. Where Cassandra was all glittering surfaces and sharp edges, Marcus was solid oak. He was quiet, with a thoughtful gravity that seemed out of place in this glittering circus. He had eyes that didn't just see you, they registered you. He was the only person at Table 1 who had looked directly at Elara when she poured his water and said, clearly and without affectation, "Thank you." He didn't just glance. He looked. And in that brief, 2-second connection, Elara felt a flicker of recognition, a warmth that was as foreign and startling as a summer breeze in January. Cassandra, a woman whose perception was a finely tuned radar for the slightest social anomaly, saw it all. She watched Elara move to the other side of the table. She watched Marcus's eyes follow her for a fraction of a second, too long. It was nothing, a barely perceptible trace. But to Cassandra, it was a declaration of war. "Darling." Cassandra's voice was a silver knife, slicing through the ambient chatter and drawing the attention of the entire table. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on Marcus's arm. "Are you finding the staff particularly compelling this evening?" Marcus stiffened, his jaw tightening. "I was just noticing her professionalism, Cassandra. She's very efficient." "Efficient," Cassandra repeated, savoring the word as if it were a cheap wine she was about to spit out. "Yes, I suppose she is. Like a well-oiled machine." She gave a tight, dismissive smile and turned back to her conversation, but the shot had been fired. A warning had been issued. Later, as the dessert course was being cleared, the moment of escalation arrived. Cassandra's closest friend, A woman named Portia Sterling, whose laughter was always a little too loud, leaned back dramatically to tell a story. Her elbow connected squarely with Ilara's tray. A delicate porcelain ramekin of crème brûlée and a silver spoon tumbled, crashing onto the marble floor with a sound that seemed to silence the entire ballroom. "Oh my heavens!" Portia shrieked, her hand flying to her mouth in a pantomime of shock. "You clumsy girl! Look what you've done!" Ilara froze, the heat of 1,000 eyes searing her back. "My profound apologies, Mrs. Sterling. It was my—" "So terribly clumsy," Cassandra's voice cut in, smooth and cold as a glacier. A predator's smile played on her lips as she looked directly at Marcus. "It's a tragedy, really. Some people simply lack the requisite grace for fine things." Ilara bent to retrieve the shattered porcelain, her cheeks burning with a humiliation so profound it felt like a physical blow. She was a ghost. But suddenly, everyone could see her. "That's enough, Cassandra," Marcus said. His voice was low, but it carried an unmistakable edge of command. "What?" "It's a simple observation, darling. An objective truth." Cassandra's gaze, chips of Arctic ice, settled on Ilara, who was now standing, the broken pieces in her gloved hand. "Do be more careful, dear. The clean-up fee for that dish is probably more than you make in a week." Ilara looked up and met Cassandra's stare. For one fleeting, incandescent moment, the invisible waitress vanished. In her place stood something else, something ancient, still, and unbreachable. Her spine straightened, the shame evaporated, replaced by a cold, clear focus. "Yes, Miss Van Doren," she said, her voice perfectly level, devoid of tremor or apology. "It will not happen again." She turned and walked away, the very picture of professional composure. But she could feel Cassandra's stare on her back, 2 pinpricks of focused, venomous rage. The game hadn't officially begun. Cassandra hadn't even found the board yet, but she had most certainly found her opponent. Cassandra Van Doren was not accustomed to being defied, not even by the subtlest shift in a waitress's tone. And she was certainly not accustomed to her fiancé defending one. She subtly signaled to a man standing near the ballroom entrance, a man who looked like part of the venue's security, but whose suit was too well tailored. Mr. Croft, her family's head of security, and more accurately, their private fixer. "Croft," she murmured into her wine glass as he approached. "The waitress. Read. I want to know everything. I want the name of her landlord, the brand of her toothpaste, the ghosts in her closet. I want to know what gives a little nobody like that the audacity to look me in the eye." Croft gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Consider it a closed file, Miss Van Doren." He melted back into the opulent shadows. Cassandra took a delicate sip of her Chateau d'Yquem. She would dissect this girl's life. She would find the pressure point, the hidden shame, the secret weakness, and then she would press down until it shattered. She would remind Marcus and the world of the natural order of things, and the place a girl like Ilara Reed occupied within it, beneath notice, beneath contempt, beneath her heel. 3 days later, a slim encrypted file was transmitted to Cassandra's penthouse computer. It contained the stark, grey architecture of Ilara Reed's life. Subject: Ilara M. Reed. Age: 22. Address: 718 Orchard Saint, Apt 5C. Financials: outstanding debt, 184,721.58. Medical attributed to Kaito Tanaka, maternal grandfather, deceased. Known associates: none of significance. Employment history: various service industry positions since age 18. Surveillance notes: day off. Subject spent 4 hours at the Nikki Cultural Center Library. Did not meet anyone. Observed studying archival records and what appeared to be diagrams in older Japanese texts. Later, subject visited Washington Square Park, sat alone at a stone table, did not use a phone, did not read, unpacked a small, worn wooden board and 2 small pouches of stones from her bag, played against herself for 2 hours. Cassandra scrolled back, her perfectly shaped eyebrow arching. The name Kaito Tanaka snagged her attention. She typed it into a private database her family maintained. A file, thin and old, appeared. Kaito Tanaka, former Insei. A student training to be a professional player of the game of Go at the prestigious Nihon Kiin in Tokyo, immigrated to the US in 1938, interned at Manzanar, 1942 to 1945. Post-war, worked as a gardener, amateur Go enthusiast, deceased. Cassandra then focused on the surveillance note, a small worn wooden board and 2 small pouches of stones. Go. A slow, exquisitely cruel smile spread across her face. It was too perfect. It was a gift from the heavens. Go was Cassandra's game. She was the 2-time president of the Yale Go Club. Her father had hired a 9-dan professional from Korea to tutor her for 2 summers. To her, Go was the ultimate intellectual battlefield, a game of territory, strategy, and utter annihilation. It was a game for Van Dorens, for minds honed by centuries of privilege and power. Not for the granddaughter of a gardener. This little ghost, this nobody, thought she was clever. Playing by herself in the park with her dead grandfather's pathetic little toy. How quaint, how utterly, beautifully pathetic. Cassandra would use this. She would construct a stage, shine a spotlight, and dissect this girl, stone by stone, in front of the very man she was trying to impress. The plan formed in her mind, fully grown and venomous. The Van Doren Foundation Gala was in 2 weeks. It was the event of the season, hosted at the family's sprawling estate on the north shore of Long Island. As the chairwoman of the event, Cassandra had complete control over the evening's program. She made a single phone call to the Aurelian Club's catering manager. A special request. Elara Reed was to be on the staff list for the gala. It was non-negotiable. The night of the gala, the Van Doren estate was a galaxy of light and sound, adrift in the dark Long Island woods. Snowflakes, fat and cinematic, drifted down onto acres of impossibly perfect lawns. Inside, the grand ballroom was a throbbing, glittering heart of power and wealth. Elara, her black and white uniform feeling more like a costume than ever, moved through the sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos, her silver tray a small shield. She tried not to look for Marcus, but her eyes scanned the room anyway, a traitorous compass. She focused on her tasks, offer the canapes, clear the glasses, remain invisible. At precisely 10 o'clock, the orchestra faded to a hush. Cassandra Van Doren, a vision in a gown of shimmering emerald silk that matched her jewels, glided to the microphone on the ballroom's main stage. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice, amplified and velvety, wrapped the room in silence. "Thank you all for your staggering generosity tonight in support of the Children's Literacy Fund." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, gliding over ambassadors and hedge fund kings until they found their target. They locked onto Elara, who was standing near a service entrance, her tray laden with empty champagne flutes. Elara's heart stopped. A block of ice formed in her stomach. "Tonight," Cassandra continued, her tone dripping with a sweet, false magnanimity, "we have some wonderful music for you. But first, I thought we might engage in a small, impromptu exhibition. A battle of wits, if you will." A curious murmur rippled through the crowd. "It has come to my attention," Cassandra said, her gaze fixed on Elara, "that we have a hidden intellectual talent in our very midst tonight." Marcus, standing near the stage with his father, The formidable Harrison Thorne frowned in confusion. "As many of you know," Cassandra went on, "I am a passionate devotee of the game of Go. And I heard the most charming rumor that one of the staff here tonight," she pointed, a diamond-clad finger piercing the shadows and pinning Ilara to the spot, "fancies herself quite the strategist, Ms. Ilara Reed." Ilara felt the air leave her lungs. Every head in the ballroom, hundreds of them, swiveled in her direction. The collective weight of their gaze was a physical force, crushing her. "Come, come," Cassandra beckoned with a theatrical wave. "Don't be shy." As if on cue, two staff members, their faces grimly neutral, wheeled out a low, lacquered table. On it sat a Go board of breathtaking beauty. It was a single, thick block of kaya wood, its grain like spun gold, the grid lines drawn with a single hair brush. The stones, held in two hand-carved mulberry bowls, were slate and shell, polished to a deep luster. It was a king's set. "What in God's name is she doing?" Marcus muttered to his father, taking a step forward. "Wait," Harrison Thorne said, his voice a low rumble. He placed a restraining hand on his son's arm. "Let's watch the girl play." Ilara was ensnared. The catering manager was already at her elbow, hissing, "Go on, Reed. Don't make a scene. Just do as she says." Numbly, her feet moving as if through deep water, Ilara walked toward the stage. The whispers followed her, a swarm of stinging insects. "A waitress? Is this a joke? Cassandra is in rare form tonight. That poor girl. She looks like she's going to faint." She mounted the two low steps to the stage. Cassandra was smiling, a portrait of benevolent grace. She gestured to the silk cushion opposite her. "Welcome, Ilara. We're all so eager to see you play." As Ilara sat, Cassandra leaned in, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper for Ilara's ears alone. "I hear you play in the park. How lovely. Let's see how you fare against someone whose name is on the building." She sat back, addressing the crowd again. "You will play white, of course," Cassandra announced magnanimously. "The first move. Let us give you every possible advantage." This was the cage. To refuse was to cause a scene, to be fired, to be branded a coward. To play and lose, which was Cassandra's clear, unassailable intention, was to be subjected to a public vivisection, to be labeled a fraud and a fool in front of Marcus and his entire world. Ilara looked down at the board, at the 361 intersections of the grid. She hadn't played a serious game in over a decade, not since the last time she'd played with her grandfather in the week before he died. Her hands began to tremble. It started in her fingertips, a faint tremor that spread up her arms, a high-frequency vibration of pure, unadulterated terror. For Ilara Reed, a Go board was not a game. It was a sanctuary, and it was a tomb. She looked at the polished white shell stones, gleaming under the hot stage lights, and she didn't see game pieces. She saw her grandfather, Kaito Tanaka. The name meant nothing to the titans in this room, but in the small, hushed world of Go clubs in the 1930s, both in Tokyo and in Little Tokyo, Los Angeles, it had meant something. He was a prodigy, an insei who they said had the eyes of a master. He didn't just play Go, he breathed it. He saw life through its lens. Fuseki, in the way the morning glories climbed a trellis. Tesuji, in the artful placement of a stone in a Zen garden. Yosei, in the patient trimming of a bonsai. He taught Ilara to play before she could write her own name. He'd sit her on his lap in their small, meticulously clean apartment, the air smelling of green tea and old books. "You see, Ilara-chan," he would whisper, his voice raspy with age. "The board is not a battlefield. It is a conversation. The stones are our words. You do not shout. You do not boast. You listen. You place a stone, and you listen to what the board tells you. She had been his only student, his legacy. By the time she was 10, she could read a game 50 moves ahead. She understood the flow, the balance, the silent poetry of it all. But Kaito Tanaka carried a wound that had been inflicted not by a game, but by his own country. The years in the dust and heat of Manzanar had stolen his professional dreams. He had arrived in America with a go board and a letter of recommendation from a master. He left the camp with a deep, abiding silence and a distrust of grand ambitions. He taught Elara a style of go that was almost extinct. It was not the modern, aggressive, territory-focused game of the Korean professionals Cassandra had studied with. It was an older, more philosophical style, focused on building influence, moyo, on patience, on creating a thing of beauty and balance on the board. He despised fighting. A true master wins without a single captured stone, he would say. The game is won in the heart, not on the board. The night his heart finally gave out, Elara was 18. He had wagered nothing but his time, yet he had lost everything. He left her with his worn go set, a shelf of books she couldn't read, and a mountain of medical bills from a healthcare system that had failed him. The debt was an anchor, drowning her, forcing her into this life of invisibility. Elara never played again. Not really. The solitary games in the park were a kind of meditation, a way to feel close to him, to hear his voice in the click of the stones. But she never played against another person. She never risked that sacred space. And now, sitting on this glittering stage, with Cassandra Van Doren's carnivorous smile boring into her, Elara felt the barbed wire of the past closing in. This was a different kind of internment, a public cage, a spectacle of cruelty, and a board that promised only shame. "Well," Cassandra purred, her voice snapping Elara back to the present, "it's your move, White. Don't be nervous." Elara looked up, her gaze sweeping past Cassandra to the crowd. She saw Marcus. His face was not mocking. It was etched with a pained, helpless empathy. He looked at her as if he knew, somehow, that this was a desecration. That one look, that small measure of human decency in a room devoid of it, was a lifeline. It broke the paralysis. She had spent 4 years as a ghost, paying for a debt that was a monument to injustice, terrified of the one beautiful thing her grandfather had given her. She was hiding, letting bullies and circumstance define her. She looked at Cassandra, then back at the golden Kaya board. The trembling in her hands didn't stop, but its nature changed. It was no longer the tremor of fear. It was the hum of a live wire. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. Not the frail, dying man, but the teacher. "Do not play her game, Elara-chan. Play your game. Make her see the board the way you see it. Make it a conversation she cannot understand." Elara reached out her hand. The tremors ceased. Her fingers were as steady as a surgeon's. She closed her eyes for a single, profound second, took a deep breath, and opened them. The fear was gone. The waitress was gone. A master's granddaughter sat in her place. Her fingers closed around a cool, polished shellstone, with a sharp, definitive click-click that echoed in the silent room. She placed it on the board. Not in the corner, not on the side, as was standard. She placed it at Tengen, the very center point of the board, the point of heaven. It was an opening so audacious, so unorthodox, it was considered either the move of a rank amateur or a supreme master. It was a philosophical statement. I do not claim a corner of this world. I claim the center of the universe. Cassandra's smile faltered, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing her features. She had expected a timid, conventional corner enclosure. She recovered instantly, a smirk returning to her lips. The girl was a fool, an amateur. Cassandra responded with a swift, aggressive move, claiming a corner. 4-4 point, the modern, territory-oriented opening. The game was on. The air in the ballroom, which had been buzzing with smug anticipation, grew thick with a new tension. The whispers faded into a dense, watchful silence. This was no longer a simple humiliation. It was a riddle. Cassandra was a strong player, a textbook player. Her tutors had drilled into her the modern yoseki, the established patterns of play. Her moves were sharp, precise, and aimed at one thing: profit. She built territory in the corners with ruthless efficiency. Knight's move, one space jump. She was playing like a real estate developer, cordoning off valuable land. Each move was a fence post, a no trespassing sign. Ilara's play was strange. After her shocking opening move, her stones spread out slowly, occupying points of influence. She wasn't building walls. She was establishing a presence. Her stones were like lonely sentinels on distant hills, seemingly disconnected, creating a vast, loose framework in the center of the board. To the 99% of the audience who knew nothing of the game, it looked like a massacre. "She's not even trying to take the corners," Portia Sterling whispered to the man beside her. "Cassandra has her completely boxed out. This will be over in 20 minutes. Cassandra certainly believed so. She played with a theatrical flair, placing her stones with a sharp click, then leaning back to examine her nails. She invaded Ilara's nascent sphere of influence. A black stone dropped aggressively among the white. "Oh dear," Cassandra said, her voice carrying to the front rows. "You've left a door wide open. You must protect your groups, Ilara. They're all you have." Ilara didn't look up. She simply played another quiet move on the other side of the board, her expression as serene and unreadable as a painted mask. Marcus Thorne watched, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He knew nothing about Go, but he knew people. He knew Cassandra was playing to the crowd, her moves arrogant and loud, and he saw Ilara. She wasn't playing Cassandra. She was tending a garden only she could see. She was in another world, a bubble of pure, unwavering focus. 50 moves in, the board was a stark picture of contrast. Cassandra's black stones controlled all 4 corners, solid, tangible territory. She was leading by at least 40 points. Ilara's white stones were scattered across the center, a loose, ethereal constellation. It looked like a lost cause. Cassandra, buoyed by her apparent dominance, decided it was time to deliver the killing blow. She saw what she believed was a large, clumsy group of Ilara's white stones that could be cut off and killed. It was a simple, brutal calculation. 12 stones, 12 points. It was greedy. It was obvious. And it required her to move a large group of her own stones deep into Ilara's central framework. "She's arrogant," Ilara thought, a flicker of her grandfather's calm fire igniting in her chest. "She has built 4 separate castles, but they have no roads connecting them. She thinks she is rich, but she is just isolated." Cassandra played the invasion. It was a direct, brute force assault. The crowd, sensing blood in the water, murmured in appreciation of the aggressive move. Ilara looked at the invading black stones. She looked at Cassandra's smug, triumphant face, and then she saw it. Not a defense, not a counterattack. She saw the entire board, not as a collection of territories, but as a single, breathing organism. Cassandra's invasion wasn't a strength. It was a sickness, a cancer. Her group was strong, yes, but it was deep in enemy territory, with no eyes and no easy way home. The stones are our words, Ilara-chan. Sometimes the kindest word is a sacrifice. Ilara didn't try to save her weak group. She didn't try to fight back directly. She attacked, but not the invading group. She played a stone far away, a quiet, almost a nonsensical-looking move that threatened to cut the supply line of a different, completely secure-looking black group in one of the corners. Cassandra literally scoffed, a short, sharp, incredulous sound. "Are you serious?" she whispered across the board. The girl was panicking. In her desperation, she was playing random, meaningless moves. A beginner's mistake. Ignoring the new threat as insignificant, Cassandra played another move to solidify her attack on the central white group. She was going in for the kill. The crowd buzzed. This was the end. The waitress was cracking under the pressure. Ilara's hand moved again, as calm and fluid as water. She played another stone, this time threatening the other corner. It was as if she had completely abandoned the main battle in the center. A few people in the room who actually understood the game, including Harrison Thorne and a visiting Japanese business magnate named Kenji Tanaka, leaned forward, their bodies rigid with attention. Harrison wasn't a master, but as a corporate strategist, he understood the principles. He saw what was happening. Ilara hadn't been building a fortress. She had been weaving a net, and Cassandra, in her blind greed, had just swum her entire army directly into the middle of it. "She's not playing the center," Harrison murmured to Marcus. "She's using the center to attack the sides. The whole board is connected." "Is that good?" Marcus asked, his heart pounding. "It's not good or bad," Harrison replied, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension. "It's impossible." Cassandra's smile was gone. Her brow was furrowed in concentration. This wasn't going according to plan. Her central attack had stalled. And now, Ilara's seemingly random stones on the sides of the board were starting to look menacing. They were no longer lonely sentinels. They were the anchor points of a vast web. Ilara's next move was a simple connection, then another, then a quiet defensive placement. In 5 moves, her scattered ethereal framework solidified. The mist became a wall. Her constellation of stones was now a perfectly coordinated, living entity, and Cassandra's proud invading army was suddenly, terrifyingly, cut off. It was surrounded, and Cassandra's most valuable territories, her 4 corner castles, were now under siege from the outside. The hunter had become the hunted. Cassandra Van Doren was sweating. It wasn't a delicate, aristocratic perspiration. It was a cold, slick panic that beaded on her forehead and trickled down the nape of her neck. The emerald silk of her gown felt like a shroud. The board in front of her, once a testament to her dominance, was now a labyrinth of her own making. It had been 100 moves. 100 moves of her expensive, professional textbook strategy turning to ash. Every correct move she made was met by a quiet, profound, and utterly bewildering response from Ilara. The waitress wasn't just playing, she was conducting a symphony of silent stones. The whispers in the crowd had shifted. The snide remarks about Ilara were gone, replaced by confused murmurs directed at Cassandra. What is she doing? Why did she let that group get surrounded? It is not surrounded. A deep, accented voice cut through the noise. It was Kenji Tanaka, the Japanese magnate, a known 8-dan amateur. He was standing now, his eyes riveted to the board. It is being offered a choice between death and a slightly smaller death. My God, this is Insei Go. This is the Go of the 1930s. Cassandra had just made a move that looked like she was creating an escape route for her massive, surrounded group of stones. She could save them, but it would mean giving up one of her corners entirely. A significant loss of points, but the group would live. Elara looked at the move. Then she looked at Cassandra. Cassandra was vibrating with a desperate, frantic energy. She needed to save that group. It was a matter of pride. To lose such a large formation was an unthinkable humiliation. "Feed them what they hunger for," her grandfather's voice whispered, "and they will walk into the cage of their own free will." Elara ignored the escaping group. She did not try to stop it. She picked up a white stone, the one her grandfather had always called the ghost stone, and placed it in the absolute dead center of Cassandra's largest, safest-looking corner territory. A single white stone in a sea of black. The move was a thunderclap of silence. It was, by all modern theory, a wasted move, a suicide. A single stone played inside a completely sealed-off enemy territory is instantly dead. Cassandra stared at the board, her mind racing. It's a trick. She's a park player. She doesn't know theory. She's cracking. She knows she's lost the center, so she's playing a meaningless, spiteful move inside my territory. A final act of defiance. "A bold move," Cassandra said, her voice a strained, brittle imitation of her earlier confidence. "But a foolish one." With a trembling hand, Cassandra played the obvious move. She captured the single white stone, removing it from the board. She had defended her territory. She had killed the intruder. She was still winning on points. The crowd, seeing a stone captured, let out a small, polite applause, though it was thin and uncertain. Elara's response was instantaneous. She played another stone, in the exact same spot. Suicide. Again. Cassandra stared, her composure beginning to unravel. What was this? Was she being mocked? Was this some kind of psychological game? Annoyed, she captured the second stone, and then Elara played the third stone. This one was different. It wasn't in the same spot. It was adjacent to it. It was a move that in Go is called a throw-in sacrifice. Cassandra looked for a way to capture it. But there was no way. Every move she calculated led to a self-destructive position. Elara's two previous suicide moves, which Cassandra had so casually captured, had subtly removed her own group's liberties, its breathing room. She had been tricked into filling her own eyes. Cassandra realized the horrifying truth. The two dead stones weren't blunders. They were bait. Elara had given up two stones just to force Cassandra's own group into a state of Atari, a position from which it could be captured on the very next move. She had built her own prison. She forced her to commit suicide, Marcus breathed, the dawning understanding hitting him like a physical blow. "No," his father corrected, his voice filled with a terrible awe. The girl didn't force her. She showed her the path, and Cassandra walked it willingly. She's been setting this up for the last 50 moves. Cassandra looked for a way out. There was none. She had to add another stone inside her own group to save it. It was a desperate, humiliating, point-losing move. She placed the stone. The room was so quiet that the click of shell on Kaya wood sounded like a bone snapping. Now it was Elara's move. She had Cassandra exactly where she wanted her. The position was set. The trap was sprung. This was no longer a game of territory. It was a problem of life and death. A strange, cold serenity settled over Elara. She was no longer Elara Reed, the ghost. She was Kaito Tanaka's legacy, and she was about to complete the masterpiece her grandfather had only ever sketched in his notebooks. She wasn't just playing to win. She was playing to create a thing of perfect, terrible beauty. A game that would be studied for 100 years. She looked up for the first time in an hour and met Cassandra's panicked, uncomprehending eyes. Elara's expression was neutral, but her eyes were burning with 1,000 years of strategy. Your move, Cassandra stammered. Ilara's hand hovered over the board. She had a simple, clean way to win the game from here. But that wasn't enough. Not for the humiliation, not for the desecration of the game, not for her grandfather. She needed to show Cassandra and everyone in this room the difference between owning the board and understanding it. She picked up a white stone. Time itself seemed to slow. Every person in that ballroom was focused on the hand of the waitress, a hand that was about to rewrite the destiny of everyone on that stage. Cassandra saw Ilara's hand move. She was trapped, yes, but she could still fight. She could minimize the damage, save face. She would still lose the game, but it wouldn't be a historic, soul-crushing defeat. Ilara Reed did not play the simple move. She took the white stone and placed it in the one spot on the entire board that seemed the most illogical. It was a move that connected two of her own weak groups, but in doing so, it seemed to put a third, much larger group of her own stones into jeopardy. It looked, to all but one person in the room, like a catastrophic blunder. A collective, confused gasp went through the audience. Harrison Thorne stood up. Kenji Tanaka let out a sharp, choked sound of pure disbelief. Cassandra Van Doren froze. Her brain, which had been a frantic calculator, went utterly blank. The move was impossible. It was a system error. It defied all known principles of the game. She laughed, not a sound of humor, but a broken, hysterical gasp. "You blundered," she hissed, her voice trembling with a desperate, soaring hope. "You fool! You tried to be clever and you blundered. You've given me your entire group." She looked at Ilara, expecting to see a mask of horror, the sudden realization of her fatal mistake. Ilara's expression was perfectly, terrifyingly serene. Cassandra looked back at the board. Capture the stones. It's the only move. Capture the stones and win. With a hand that shook so violently she could barely hold the piece, Cassandra played the move that captured Ilara's massive group. Dozens of white stones were now forfeit. She began to remove them from the board, one by one, a triumphant smile returning to her face. RxG3. "Well," Cassandra said, trying to regain her regal composure, her voice cracking, "that was anticlimactic. You lose." She sat back, the captured white stones piled beside her bowl like a hoard of treasure. She had won. The waitress had choked. Ilara did not flinch. She did not concede. Her hand moved to a single white stone, one that had been sitting quietly on the board since the opening, an almost forgotten piece. She picked it up and placed it. A single move. Click. It landed in the gaping hole left by the white stones Cassandra had just captured. The move created a shape, a perfect, inescapable eye. "That," Ilara's voice was not loud, but it sliced through the ballroom like a shard of ice, "is the game." Silence. A thick, absolute, uncomprehending silence. Cassandra Belmont didn't move. She was staring at the board, her eyes wide, her mouth agape. It wasn't possible. She had just captured 50 points worth of stones. She was leading by a mile. But Ilara's last move, it hadn't just created an eye for her own group. It had simultaneously filled the last liberty of Cassandra's massive invading army, the one she thought she had saved, the one that was the centerpiece of her strategy. It was dead. The entire thing, a formation of over 60 stones, the heart of her army, was dead on the board. It was a move so profound, so multi-layered. It was known in Go lore as Kami no Ite, the divine move. A move that solves multiple complex problems on the board at once, in a way that is both devastatingly effective and breathtakingly beautiful. It wasn't just a win. It was an annihilation that transcended points. My God, Kenji Tanaka whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. He bowed his head slightly toward the stage. It is the Phantom Ladder, a theoretical sequence. I have only ever seen it in the tattered notebooks of Kaito Tanaka, a man I met once, 40 years ago. I thought his work was lost forever. Cassandra began to shake her head, her emerald earrings trembling. No, that's not possible. You cheated. The game is over, Miss Van Doren, Elara said, her voice soft but final. You may resign at any time. She quietly stood up from the table. The silence in the ballroom was so complete you could hear the faint rustle of her apron. Then, one person began to clap. It was Harrison Thorne. He was on his feet, his applause slow, rhythmic, and booming, a sound of ultimate respect from one strategist to another. Then Marcus joined him. Then Kenji Tanaka. And within 3 seconds the entire ballroom, the senators, the CEOs, the old money matriarchs, erupted in a thunderous, spontaneous, standing ovation. They weren't clapping for a waitress. They were clapping for an artist who had just painted an immortal masterpiece. Cassandra Van Doren sat alone on the stage, a frozen queen amidst the ruins of her own arrogance. The pile of captured white stones, her meaningless treasure, sat beside her like a pile of dust. The click of Elara's final stone was the only sound in a world that had suddenly, violently gone silent. It was not a loud noise, but in the vacuum of the grand ballroom, it felt as deafening as a slamming prison door. The game is over. Elara's voice, though barely a whisper, carried to every corner. Cassandra Van Doren did not move. Her mind, a precision instrument trained on predictable, profit-driven strategies, had crashed. It was desperately trying to find a rebuttal, an escape, a flaw in the logic. But there was none. She stared at the board, her eyes wide and blank. She saw her proud black stones, her invading army, lying dead and inert across the center of the board. An entire empire, turned to a graveyard by a single, quiet move. She had captured dozens of stones, a fortune in territory, and in exchange, she had lost her soul. A single, hysterical sound, half laugh, half sob, tore from her throat. No. She looked up at Elara, her beautiful, carefully composed face shattering into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. No, you didn't. The game is over, Miss Van Doren, Elara repeated, her voice shaking now that the icy calm of the game had receded, leaving the terrified waitress in its wake. The game is over when I say it's over, Cassandra shrieked, and with a violent, sweeping motion of her arm, she cleared the board. The priceless slate and shell stones flew across the stage, skittering and clattering onto the polished floor like scattered teeth. The mulberry bowls overturned, rolling into the dark. The entire ballroom gasped. This was no longer a game. This was a desecration. You cheated! Cassandra screamed, rising to her feet, her emerald gown twisting around her like a serpent's skin. You're a hustler, a nobody. You think you can come in here and humiliate me? Marcus was already moving, but his father, Harrison, was faster. With a sharp, imperceptible gesture, Harrison Thorne signaled the 2 private security guards by the main door. Miss Van Doren. Harrison's voice was not loud, but it was an iron rod of command that cut through Cassandra's hysteria. You are making a spectacle of yourself. This evening is over for you. She's the one who made the scene. Cassandra pointed a trembling, diamond-clad finger at Elara. She planned this. This was a setup. Marcus, darling, tell them. Tell them what this thing did. Marcus had reached the foot of the stage. He looked up, not at his fiancée, but at Elara. His face was a pale, stunned canvas of horror, respect, and a terrible dawning clarity. Cassandra, he said, his voice flat. Stop, just stop. Stop! Don't you dare defend her! Not after this! The security guards were now on the stage, flanking her. They were large men, polite but immovable. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us." "Get your hands off me," Cassandra shrieked, slapping at one of the guards' arms. "Don't you know who I am? I am a Van Doren. I will have your jobs. I will have all of your jobs." She looked desperately to the crowd, to her friends, to Portia Sterling, searching for an ally. She found none. The faces that had adored her, feared her, and envied her just hours before were now universally cold. They were masks of shock, disgust, and worst of all, pity. She hadn't just lost a game. She had lost her audience. She had violated the primary rule of their class. She had lost control. Ilara, meanwhile, was trying to dissolve back into the shadows. The adrenaline was gone, and in its place was the hollow terror of the waitress who had just smashed the most expensive vase in the house. She wanted her coat. She wanted her tiny apartment. She wanted to disappear. She backed away off the stage and bumped into a wall of people. The crowd wasn't parting for her. They were staring, blocking her path. There she is. Cassandra, seeing Ilara trying to flee, broke free from the guard's grasp. She lunged, her face a gargoyle's mask of rage. "You nothing? You think you can just walk away?" She raised her hand, her heavy diamond rings glinting, to strike Ilara across the face. The slap never landed. Marcus Thorne caught her wrist in midair. His grip was absolute. The entire room, which had been buzzing, went dead silent again. This was the real final move. Cassandra stared at his hand on her wrist, then at his face, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Marcus, you're hurting me." "No," Marcus said, his voice so cold it seemed to drop the temperature of the room. "I'm stopping you." He let go of her wrist, pushing it away from him, as if it were something unclean. "You were right about one thing tonight, Cassandra," he said, his voice clear and carrying. "It is a tragedy when some people lack the requisite grace for fine things." Cassandra's face crumpled. The fury, the arrogance, the power, it all evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, terrified 24-year-old girl who had just lost everything. "Marcus, no, don't do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It was just a game, a joke. I love you." "No," Marcus said, shaking his head slowly. He looked away from Ilara and finally met Cassandra's gaze. "You love the idea of me. You love the name. You love winning. But you just showed everyone here that you have no idea what grace is. Not in victory, and certainly not in defeat." He turned his back on her. That was the final blow. Cassandra Van Doren didn't just crack. She shattered. A low, animalistic wail of despair tore from her, and she finally, utterly, collapsed. The security guards didn't have to fight her. They simply lifted her by the arms, a human ruin in an emerald dress, and carried her out of the ballroom, her sobs echoing off the marble. The room was silent for a beat, and then a new sound began. It was the slow, rhythmic, intentional applause of Kenji Tanaka. He was on his feet, his old stern face alight with a fiery, profound respect. Then Harrison Thorne joined him, his own applause a booming strategic approval. And then the entire room erupted. It was not polite applause. It was a standing, thundering, roaring ovation that washed over Ilara, a wave of heat and sound that rooted her to the spot. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking violently. Miss Reed. Mr. Tanaka was in front of her. He had pushed through the crowd, his eyes magnified by his thick glasses, boring into hers. He didn't offer a handshake. He gave a short, formal bow. "I have seen that game once before," he said, his Japanese accent thick with emotion, "but only in theory. In a notebook full of what my own master called go poetry. a notebook I believed was lost to the world. He paused, and his next words changed her life. You are Kaito Tanaka's granddaughter. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. Ilara's composure, the one she had held on to for 4 long, invisible years, finally broke. The tears she had refused to shed at her grandfather's lonely funeral, the tears she had choked back while scrubbing floors and serving the wealthy, they all came at once. Yes, she whispered, her voice cracking. He was my grandfather. Was? Tanaka shook his head. He is in you. He died, she sobbed, the words tumbling out. He died broke and in debt, and everyone forgot him. They called him a dreamer, a man who couldn't adapt. He lost everything because of who he was. Tanaka's face softened, but his eyes burned. They did not understand him. I was a boy when I met him. He was a poet in a world of accountants. He saw the soul of the game. He saw that. He gestured back to the stage, to the scattered stones. The phantom ladder. His notebooks, Ilara's head snapped up. You saw his notebooks? I did, Tanaka said. I have been searching for them for 30 years. They contain a whole school of thought we believed had vanished. Where are they? Ilara looked at the old man, the impossible truth dawning on her. The secret she never even knew she held. There are no notebooks, she said, her voice shaking. He burned them. At Manzanar. He said they were a vanity. He taught it all to me. When I was a little girl, he said, the board is in your heart, Ilara-chan, not on paper. I just remembered. Tanaka's mouth fell open. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. You don't have the notebook. You are the notebook. My God, child, you are a living treasure. He fumbled in his jacket, pulling out a pen and a business card. I run the Tanaka Go Institute in Tokyo. I train champions. I was going to offer you a teaching position. But that is an insult. He scribbled a private number on the back of the card. I am not offering you a job, he said, his voice full of a new, urgent purpose. I am offering you a sponsorship, a life. I want you to play. I want you to help me reconstruct your grandfather's work. We will not just restore the Tanaka name, we will make it immortal. He pressed the card into her hand. That debt, the 184,000, consider it paid, an advance on your future. You will be a master, Miss Reed. That is your destiny. Ilara stared at the card, the number, paid, the debt that had been a stone around her neck for 4 years, gone. Her future, a blank, terrifying grey wall, had just been painted in the most brilliant colours imaginable. Miss Reed, a second voice. She looked up. Harrison Thorne was standing beside Tanaka. His face was appreciative, like a scientist who had just witnessed a new law of physics being proven. That was the single greatest display of non-linear strategy I have ever witnessed. Mr. Tanaka will make you a master. I will make you wealthy. A mind that can see 100 moves ahead on a board like that has applications far beyond these games. My venture capital firm has a permanent and very well compensated place for a mind like yours. He too offered a card. Legacy, power, wealth. It was all swirling around her, a vortex of possibility. Father, Mr. Tanaka, please. Marcus stepped forward, gently but firmly, putting himself between Ilara and the 2 powerful men. He looked humbled, his eyes raw with emotion. Can you both give her a moment to breathe? He turned to Ilara, and the confidence of the Thorn heir was gone. In his place was just a man, looking at a woman he had profoundly misjudged. Ilara, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her name without the miss. I have no words. I am so sorry. For what she did, for my part in it. For all of it. He took a shaky breath. I don't have a sponsorship to offer, and I don't want to talk about business. He hesitated. I saw you tonight, and I would be truly, deeply honored if you would let me buy you a cup of coffee tomorrow, or the next day. Somewhere quiet, somewhere with no stages and no crowds. I just want to hear your story. Ilara looked at the three men, Tanaka offering her grandfather's past as a brilliant future, Harrison offering her a new world of power, and Marcus offering her a cup of coffee, offering her a chance to just be herself. She thought of the single stone placed at Tengen, the center of the universe. She carefully, reverently pocketed Tanaka's card. It would be an honor to speak with you, Mr. Tanaka. I will call you tomorrow. Tanaka nodded, his eyes bright. Kaito-sensei would be so proud. She then looked at Harrison Thorne and took his card as well. Thank you, Mr. Thorne. I will keep this in mind. Harrison smiled, a rare, genuine smile. I have no doubt we'll be seeing you, Miss Reed. Finally, she looked at Marcus. The noise of the crowd, the shock of the night, the weight of her past, it all faded away until it was just him. Just his kind eyes, which had seen her when she was a ghost. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Ilara Reed smiled. A real, warm, genuine smile. Coffee sounds perfect, Marcus, she said. She didn't wait for him. She didn't wait for anyone. She turned and began to walk. The crowd parted for her now, a sea of admiring, stunned faces. She walked past the service entrance, her old life, her old apron. She walked straight through the grand ballroom, her head held high, her steps sure and steady. She walked out of the massive front doors into the cold, clean winter air. The snow had stopped. The world was quiet and crystalline. She took a deep breath, the first breath of her new life. She was not a waitress. She was not her grandfather's debt. She was Ilara Reed, and her game was just beginning.